Hello and welcome to Great Britain in Focus. My name is James McCullough.
And I'm Pascal Mary Rakovich. Saint Robert Southwell, or Southwell, is a little-known English martyr who was executed in 1595 at Tyburn.
He was a Jesuit priest and a poet whose great concern was for the re-evangelisation of the clergy at a time of great corruption. He is remarkable for his heroic courage and silence during horrific torture leading to his death.
Let's join Fiorella Nash as she relates his story.
There we are. Do you know, I've spent so much of my life reading about this saint and I've never been to his house. Is it your first visit?
Yes.
Right. This is the Southwell family home. Robert is not buried here because, of course, he was martyred and he never had a resting place. But this is where they all are. His aunt, his brother are all buried in that church. Had you even heard the name Robert Southwell before I mentioned him?
Well, I've heard the name.
But of course, you have Edmund Campion, you have Henry Garnet and all those, John Gerard. Robert Southwell is one of the ones who's been forgotten. But I absolutely love this saint. I discovered him by accident, and I was sure that the great saint himself had pointed out his works to me. So I was in the college library trying to find a Catholic writer, because it's all Sidney and Spencer and evil papists and evil cardinals and evil monks, and you know, it gets a bit tiresome when you're the only Catholic in your group. And there he was, SJ. And I thought, that's it. You see, the Holy Spirit obviously guided me to that book. And I ended up doing a whole master's thesis on Robert Southwell's books. He's either Southwell or Southwell. No one quite knows how he would have said it. I just call him Father Robert because, you know, when you spend that much time studying someone's works, you know this from editing and things, you get close to them, you know. And it's extraordinary looking at this building and realising that such a great saint, who is such an innocent soul, just so beautiful as a person, had a grandfather who made a lot of money out of the dissolution of the monasteries. So it's worth saying a prayer for all the people here because, you know, there's been a lot of suffering in this part of the world, you know, with the Reformation and the iconoclasms, and Walsingham is so beautiful, and yet Henry VIII particularly vindictively destroyed it because of his shame, because of the loss of his child. So Robert Southwell was born right in the middle of all of that, in the ruins of England's Catholic heritage, but he wasn't a nostalgic Catholic. He was very much a Catholic Reformation Catholic. He wanted to re-evangelise Britain. That was always what he wanted to do, and of course he then came on the English mission when he was only in his early 20s. You know, they were ordained much younger at the time. One of the things I found most exciting about Father Robert's writings was he was very aware of what had gone wrong in the faith. He was aware of the corruption in the church and the terrible behaviour of some members of the clergy. In one of his spiritual diaries, he wrote something that I found really devastating at the time, that the bad behaviour of priests had made the name of monk synonymous with rogue. And we, through the holiness of our lives, must renew the church, renew the bride of Christ. And of course, reading that when I did at the time when the whole Boston crisis was just exploding, it was devastating because it made me realise this has happened before, but it was also a sign of hope that the church can renew itself through holy priests, and someone like Father Robert really led the way with an incredibly holy and courageous life. But it started in a pretty corrupt corner of the world, and in a place where he could have wallowed in that sense of regret that England had been this beautiful Catholic country and the dowry of Our Lady, and had that sense of trying to turn back the clock. England was never going to be the same again. The church in England was never going to be the same again, but he wanted to make it beautiful for Christ. So, shall I show you the church?
Yes.
Would you like to look?
I'd love to.
Robert had an interesting last winter before he was arrested. He was given a safe house, and it was all funded by Lady Anne Dacre, Philip Howard's wife, and he was able to do a lot of writing. We owe it to her that he got so much writing done that winter. Not long after that, he walked into a trap. Most people who are betrayed by someone they know. Yes. I would think of the kiss of Judas Iscariot. And there was a family, the Bellamy family. They were very staunch Catholics, well known in the recusant circle. And their daughter Anne was arrested by the notorious Richard Topcliffe. And he was prepared to stop at nothing to find him. Robert was regarded at the time as a giant among the papists. When he was arrested, Richard Topcliffe wrote to the Queen saying, "I never did take so weighty a man." And Anne Bellamy was raped in prison by Topcliffe and became pregnant. He promised her, if she would betray the priest, that he would find her a husband, his servant, Nicholas Jones, and he also promised that her family would not be harmed. Of course, he never kept that promise. Her family were all arrested with Robert, and her mother died in prison. But that was the deal he struck with her. And she was reviled in memory. The recusant community really turned against her because she was a traitor, she was a collaborator. If you think about the way collaborators were treated during the last war, you get some sense of the amount of vitriol that would have been thrown at her. And having said that, through the lens of hindsight, she didn't have a great deal of choice. She was put in a very, very difficult position. But as a result of her betrayal, he was arrested. And the story goes that Robert was able to hide in a priest hole. The priest hunters came, started taking the place apart. He began to realise, as they all realised, that in fact they knew he was there. They had been tipped off. It wasn't just a chance raid. And so he came out of the priest hole himself. Rather than being dragged out, he came out and faced them. He was taken to Richard Topcliffe's house. Don't ask me how a man tortured people in his own home, but he did. He had a torture chamber in his house. And he worked on him personally before having to give up, and then having him transferred to prison where they continued to torture him. They used a method called wall torture, which was supposed to be worse than the rack. It was supposed to be impossible to cope with. John Gerard described being taken into a room. The way he describes the psychological aspect of it is quite telling to 21st century eyes. They walked him down a corridor, people with lighted candles, very, very sinister. He was taken into a room, and his hands were manacled and he was hung from the metal hoops. There were steps that were taken away until he was left hanging. And it doesn't sound as bad as some of the things that happened in those torture chambers, but it's apparently impossible to cope with more than about 10 minutes of hanging like that. He described feeling as though there was blood oozing out of his fingers, out of his fingertips. It was completely overwhelming. And this happened to Robert Southwell at least 10 times, for hours at a time, each time. William Cecil, who was a great hater of Catholics, went to watch, because that's what nice Elizabethan gentlemen did. They went to watch people being tortured, particularly priests. And he described to a friend afterwards, he said, "We talk about our heroes of old, but there is a method of torture that none can bear, and yet I have seen Father Southwell hanging there as still as a tree trunk, and not one word could they drag from his lips." And we tend to be quite flippant about the heroism of people like that. I don't know how many times you've read a story where they say he was terribly tortured and he never said a word. That was almost impossible. Very few people, even the great saints, the great martyrs, never said anything, because everything was geared towards making sure they did talk. Robert Southwell was one of only a couple who said nothing all the way through, and eventually they gave up and they just threw him in the tower. There's a very touching story, very distressing story of one of his relatives, I think it was his father, going to see him and seeing him in a terrible state, emaciated, absolutely filthy, lying in straw, covered in lice. And his father petitioned the Queen on his behalf and said, if he has committed a crime worthy of death, let him be put on trial and let him be executed quickly, but treat him as a gentleman. He is a gentleman, he has a right to a trial. And so they did put him on trial. If you think of a Stalinist show trial, that is what he got. It was a foregone conclusion. He was going to be convicted, he was going to be executed, but he had his day in court. Everything he did say was twisted to have some kind of nefarious meaning it never had. So when he was asked how old he was, he said he was the same age as Christ when he suffered, 33. And immediately it was, oh, so you think you're Christ, do you? He had to watch Anne Bellamy give evidence against him in court. She almost certainly would not have wanted to do that, but that was part of the deal, that she had to speak against him. And he was subjected to a huge amount of anti-Catholic abuse, you can imagine it, as he was found guilty, no surprises, and sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered. It was the ultimate penalty for treason. So he was taken to Tyburn. There was a whole ritual connected up with the execution of Catholics. Because he was so famous at the time, mostly because of his poetry, the authorities were worried about there being thousands of people there. They thought it was going to be a bit of a celebrity event. Hangings were celebrity events. There was nothing like an execution for a bit of entertainment. And so they kept the date of the execution secret. The condemned were tied to hurdles, which were bits of wood, and dragged through the streets behind horses. They'd get covered with mud. People would throw things at them. It was a real Calvary, actually. It was very, very like the way of the cross. One of his relatives, who is completely nameless, walked with him, almost like the women of Jerusalem, like Veronica. There's something very poignant about that journey, that sharing of that final journey, until he said to her that she should go, or she would be put in prison again. That's a whole story we know nothing about. She'd obviously been in and out of prison. We don't know who she was, we don't know what happened to her. When a traitor was executed, everyone was supposed to cheer. No one cheered when he was killed. And a member of the crowd, a member of the aristocracy, is said to have remarked, "I cannot answer for his religion, but I hope that when I die, my soul may be in such a state as his."
We now meet Niall McDonagh, a young Irishman who shares with us his conversion story.
From a troubled childhood, seeking a life of gratification, followed by tragic events in his life, he turned to God for help.
We hear how both Eucharistic adoration and his missionary experience played a pivotal role in his return to the faith and has led him to become an active witness in our church today.
Hi there, my name's Alex Cooper. Welcome to our studio here in Walsingham. Today I have with me Niall McDonagh from across the channel in Ireland. And Niall, what was life growing up for you?
I was actually born here in England, in London.
Okay.
In the Croydon area.
Wow.
I went to primary school in Streatham, St Andrews there in Streatham, and I went to secondary school then for a year or two in John Fisher in Purley.
Wow.
I'm the middle child of three boys, older brother and younger brother. My mother was very active in her Catholic faith, but unfortunately for me, I didn't really take it too seriously growing up. I was too busy playing sports. I loved playing sports and hanging around with my friends. I played rugby, athletics, but the sport that I really liked was football. Then at 14 years of age, my family and we moved back to Galway in Ireland, and it was around that time, Alex, then that life got pretty complicated for me. I began to make some poor decisions. I began to lead a pleasure-seeking lifestyle. I always thought that gratification was going to make me happy. In doing so, I kind of isolated myself from the rest of my family. But it was a very dark time for me as well, to be honest. All throughout my teenage years and into my early 20s, it became a very dark time for me. Because what happened was I started living without any hope. Life became pretty hopeless for me, you know. As I said, I wasn't doing the best of things at my time. I did a lot of things that I'm not proud of as well. And to be honest, when I reflect on my behaviours, I was just basically trying to fill a lot of the voids and a lot of the holes that were in my heart, you know, and I tried to fill them with material things, you know, thinking that they were going to make me happy. So yeah, that was most of my youth. But then in my early 20s then, my life was turned upside down. In an accident on the football pitch, I severely broke my leg. Playing a football match at the time. One of the things that kind of kept me, I suppose, a bit on the straight and narrow was playing sport, you know, because there's a certain amount of discipline that comes with that, you know, although my lifestyle wasn't the best, to be honest, for any sports person. But I had an accident on the football pitch, and it was a compound fracture, which means my tibia and fibula broke.
Wow.
And there was complications then because the bone comes through the skin. There was complications, and there was an infection. And I had a number of surgeries, but then the infection manifested itself, and I had to go back into hospital again. And I have a number of pins and a rod going through my kneecap, and they had to take them all out. But then I remember the surgeon, he came into the hospital bedroom and he sat at the end of the bed, and he said to me, "Look, Neil, worst case scenario, we're going to have to amputate your leg." And for me at the time, you know, I was very superficial, very vain.
How did that feel?
Yeah, very superficial, very vain. And to be honest, my number one concern was, oh my goodness, what are people going to think of me? Like, you know, how am I going to be attractive to girls anymore now?
Of course,
you know, these sort of kind of vain thoughts were running through my head, and it was like it was a dream when he was saying it to me. I remember he left the hospital bedroom then. I was like, oh my goodness, it was the first time in my life, Alex, then I actually had to face myself, and I made this prayer from my heart. A really raw prayer, and because my mother had always been praying for me and talking about God, but again, I never would have taken any of it seriously, you know, especially, you know, come from my mother, you know. And I made this prayer from my heart, and I said, God, whoever you are, or whatever you are, if you're real, I said, then save my leg, because I don't want this to happen to me. And I started apologising. I said, I'm sorry for doing all the things that I'm doing.
Yeah.
As I said, a lot of things I'm not proud of, and I said, look, I'm sorry for everything that I've ever done, and you know, if you're real, I said, God, please save my leg, and I'll be good from now on, you know. I was making this kind of bargain, you know. I was like, I'll be good from now on, and I'll stop doing the things I was doing. And when I said that prayer, Alex, I was overcome with this peace and calmness within myself that I'd never felt before, just interiorly within myself, you know. And it's hard to explain, but it was like God had heard my prayer, you know.
And the first time you were actually coming clean with the Father.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Admitting to myself who I was, and in doing so admitting to Him who I was, in terms of my brokenness, you know. And
so what happened in terms of the operation?
Yeah.
What actually happened, and what was the doctors sort of going,
right,
everything's good? Or?
Yeah. So thank God, after I had 3 more surgeries, and thank God after the surgeries, as you can see, my leg is good.
You still got the legs?
Yeah, I did, but unfortunately, God kept His half of the bargain, but I didn't keep mine, because I promised I would change my life and that and the other, you know. So I went away from that. But I couldn't deny that God had heard my prayer, you know. But then after my last surgery, 6 months later, I had to deal with another tragic event.
Yeah.
This was the death of my older brother, somebody who looked up to.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he took his own life by suicide, you know. And this really stopped me in my tracks. And to be honest, Alex, after breaking my leg and then losing my brother to suicide, I really hardened my heart towards God, because in the space of then months, in 6 to 9 months, I was learning to walk again. Yeah. And then burying my older brother, you know, in a very short time. And I was just left to deal with that grief. And I was angry. I was really, really angry.
How dare you, God?
Exactly. I was like, why would a good God allow these bad things to happen to me? Yeah. You know, my mother was always talking about how good God is, and He's a loving God. And if He's a loving God, then why would these bad things be happening to me? Because all you're left to deal with is the grief.
Yeah.
And, you know, grief is such a personal, unique thing, and you suddenly become a stranger in a world you think has changed forever. Everything around you kind of changes forever, you know.
And how did you deal with that grief, and what got you through that grief?
Yeah.
On a personal level, I mean,
Right.
were you going to Mass at that point?
No, because as I said, Alex, like I hardened my heart towards any prospect that there might be a God or a loving God, you know. And, you know, you basically, you're trying to do your best. You're stumbling and you're falling because you're stuck in this whirlwind of pain and loss. And thank God I coped. I got through my days and I coped, but just about, to be honest, you know. One day, my mother said to me, you know, Neil, we were walking past an Adoration chapel that's just next to the church, and she goes, you know, Neil, Jesus is in there, you know, he's in there. And I was like, Jimmy, he's in there. And she's like, yeah, no, he's in there in the monstrance. I was like, but where? And she goes, yeah, in the Eucharist, that's Jesus is in there, and you can go in and you can speak to him. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. I said, right, I'm just going to go in here and see what's going on. And I walked into this Adoration chapel, and everybody was sitting there, and everybody was very quiet, and like they were peaceful. And some people were staring at the Eucharist, you know. I was like, man, like, what's going on here? I was like, these people are either very mad or there's something in this, you know. So I tried.
Did you know what it was from your childhood?
No, I do. I remember, obviously, I remember at Mass, obviously, the consecration and that you receive communion. But I don't think I ever fully understood that is Jesus, the real person. No, I did not at all, like, to be honest with you, no. And I went into this Adoration chapel and I sat down the back and I closed my eyes and I was like, right, I'll give this a shot, you know.
Oh dear.
So, yeah. There you go, yeah. All right, I'll give this a shot. And I said, okay, Jesus, I'm here. And I said, and if you are there, then show me that you're there. And with that, again, I was overcome with a peace and a love within myself that I had felt when I was in the hospital bedroom. So I was able to make that connection. And for the next 10 or 15 minutes, I felt this lightness within myself. Again, I was like, oh my goodness, like there's something going on here, like, you know, there's something going on here. And now remember, Alex, like I've done a lot of things looking for peace and happiness, and I've looked in a lot of places. And the last place I would have looked for that was in that Adoration chapel. And yet I did experience it.
Yeah.
But when I left, I didn't really know what was going on. Again, I didn't really say it to my mother because I didn't want to encourage her anymore, you know. And I left and I was like, my goodness, like there's something in that. There's something kind of moved there within me, you know. There's something moving within me. So, yeah, I receiving all this healing from the Lord and growing more in my faith. I really had a desire then to kind of bring this gift that I had to other people.
Yeah.
I went back to university and I studied to be a teacher and a guidance counsellor and also a psychotherapist. Again, learning more about myself as well. It was a good tool to learn more about myself. And I worked as a guidance counsellor in a school in Tallaght in Dublin, which I absolutely loved. While I was working in the school with the students, I'd spend my summer months, advantage of teachers' holidays in Ireland. We get 3 months off, you know. And I would spend this time then working with the missionaries of charity. The way that came about was my first summer off. I always had a desire to work in Rio de Janeiro for some reason, in the favelas and the shanty towns. You know, I was really intrigued just by what goes on over there. And I went over there my first summer and I was teaching English in the shanty towns and the favelas. And while I was there, I just had this desire, this need that maybe there's something more. I need to be doing something more while I was there. I wasn't sure what it was. And I remember just looking up what was around me. Was there a soup kitchen around me where I was staying in the inner city in Rio de Janeiro? And it just so happened, just literally 5-10 minute walk down the road, there was a soup kitchen. So I remember I rang the sister who was running it and I said, hello sister, I'm just from Ireland, I'm over here working, I'm just wondering can I come down and help? She was like, oh absolutely, you come down at this hour. And I walked into the soup kitchen and straight away I just felt like I was at home, you know. It was run by the Missions of Charity, I didn't know that. And it was while I was there that summer I continued working with the Missions of Charity that summer. That's where I came to the biggest realisation and truth in my own life, Alex, that there was more to life, or the greatest, deepest satisfaction in life didn't come from me just accumulating material goods, but the greatest and deepest satisfaction came from actually giving. Because when I was there in my first mission trip in Rio, I thought I was going over there to minister to them, to the poor, but it was they who ministered to me. It was they who ministered to me.
Wow. Neil, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for
Alex.
sharing your
Pleasure.
story. I've been taking so much in and just listening. That's wonderful. I hope that you watching Neil's story have been touched. I hope that you've really enjoyed it. We hope to see you again here at EWTN. And with that, thank you very much and God bless.
Thank you for joining us. Full versions of these interviews will be made available on our social media channels.
Don't forget that if you would like to donate to this mission of EWTN in Great Britain, do visit our website at ewtn.co.uk and click the donate button.
We look forward to you joining us next time. Until then, goodbye and God bless.